Body of Matt Brown was found in a river in Washington state earlier this weekend, and I spoke with three of his siblings earlier today. They said they're reeling from the loss, but finding his body after 3 days of searching has provided some finality.
Nobody warned Matt Brown that telling the truth would cost him everything. He grew up on camera, built a life that millions watched, and when the show was finally over, he did what his entire family refused to do. He confessed to the lies that held them all together. And one by one, the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally walked away. By the end, there was only a river. The morning bear, Brown, broke down. On the morning of May 31st, 2026, Bear Brown sat in front of his camera, barely holding himself together, and told the world that his older brother was gone. His voice cracked repeatedly as he confirmed what the family had been dreading for days. The body recovered from the Okanogan River in northeastern Washington had been positively identified as Matt Brown, the eldest of the 7 Brown children, dead at 43 years old. What made that announcement almost unbearable to watch was a detail that could easily get lost under the weight of the news itself. Bear explained that his brother Noah had been out with the private search party that located the body. Noah was the one who helped pull Matt out of the water. Noah was the one who stood at that riverbank and confirmed it was him. Think about what that moment actually felt like, and you start to understand that the grief inside that family in the days that followed was not a single wave, but a whole series of them that kept coming. Bear also pushed back on what had been spreading online, the idea that the family had simply abandoned Matt and left him to fall apart alone. He insisted the situation was far more complicated than any headline could contain. But what he said next is the part that deserves to stop every single person watching this video completely still. He mentioned that in one of Matt's final videos, Matt had spoken openly on camera about how much the negative comments on his posts had hurt him. And Bear looked directly into his lens and said what most of us already know, but almost never act on. The person on the other side of your screen is a real human being, and sometimes words hurt more than fists ever could. That is not a throwaway line at the end of a grief video. That is a man telling you as clearly as he possibly can that the cruelty his brother absorbed from strangers online played a real role in where things ended up. And if you have ever left a cruel comment on a stranger's post and told yourself it would not land anywhere that mattered, that is the part of this story that was written specifically for you. The coroner had not yet released an official ruling at the time of Bear's announcement. But what was already clear was that a man who had survived years of addiction, family estrangement, and public humiliation had reached a point that none of the millions of people who watched him his entire life ever truly saw coming. The confirmation on May 31st was the end of the story, but the days that preceded it reveal a search that no family should ever have to go through. 5 days on the river. On Wednesday, May 27, 2026, a 911 caller reported seeing a man sitting in the shallows of the Okanogan River near Oroville. The caller looked away briefly. When they turned back, the man was face down in the current and drifting away. A family member reported having seen Matt that same morning near the Driscoll Island Wildlife Area, roughly a mile from where the call was made. A backpack with an empty holster was found near the water, with the gun believed to be submerged in the river somewhere downstream. Dispatch audio obtained by multiple outlets referenced a man believed to be in distress, reported to have entered the water, though those details had not yet been officially confirmed. The Okanogan County Sheriff's Office launched a full search involving divers, cadaver dogs, sonar equipment, and a boat crew from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Brother Gabe was reported at the scene and in contact with police. For 2 days, the search continued, methodical and grim. Then a severe storm moved through the area, and the river conditions became too dangerous to work safely. The official search was suspended. On Friday, May 29th, Bear posted publicly for the first time that he believed his brother was gone. He said he had been told Matt had passed away near the river, and that while he was holding on to the smallest possible chance that the information was wrong, he was already preparing himself for the worst. His voice in that video carried the particular weight of someone who has already accepted a truth they are desperately hoping to be incorrect about. He said something else in that video that deserves to be heard clearly. He said he had never thought Matt would hurt himself. He had always worried about an overdose, about the addiction finally winning in the way addictions do. But this, he said, he would not have predicted. 2 days later, a private search party found the body. Noah identified his brother. Bear went live and told the world. You could argue this is where the story ends. But everything that happened in those 5 days between May 27 and May 31st is only comprehensible if you understand what Matt's life had looked like in the weeks and months before anyone knew to go looking for him. Long before a 911 caller looked away from a stranger in a river, there were warning signs broadcasting in plain sight that almost nobody watching knew how to read. What he was already telling us. The months leading into the tragedy of May 2026 carried visible markers that in hindsight read as a sustained and desperate distress signal. Matt's mother, Amy, 61 years old and already weakened from years of serious health battles, including a lung cancer diagnosis in 2017 and multiple pneumonia hospitalizations in recent years, was rushed to the hospital on April 11, 2026, dealing with COVID and pneumonia simultaneously. The family was already operating under serious strain before any of the May events began. Matt, meanwhile, was still posting to his YouTube channel and Instagram in the weeks before he disappeared. His channel bio described a man living a quiet and free life in recovery, devoted to self-growth and useful entertainment. Around the middle of May, Matt live-streamed himself in a public park in Washington, appearing visibly confused and distressed. Reports described him as possibly intoxicated and behaving in a way that disturbed people watching in real time. This was not a recovery update or an adventure video. This was a person in a visible crisis, broadcasting it live to strangers, and the audience watching had no meaningful way to help him. And then there was May 10th, roughly 3 weeks before his death. Matt posted a video that day describing how he had spent the previous night sleeping in a cemetery because he could not find anywhere safe to sleep. He mentioned that his late father had once told him cemeteries were good resting places while traveling because nobody would disturb you there. He had bedded down between 2 graves. Then he looked into his camera, gestured to his head and his heart, and told his audience he was good, thanking everyone for their support and encouragement. He was sleeping alone in a graveyard, drawing comfort from advice his dead father had given him years before, and broadcasting to the internet that he was perfectly fine. And the vast majority of the people who watched it believed him and moved on to the next video in their feed. To understand why Matt was sleeping in a cemetery with almost nothing and nowhere to go, you have to go back to the single event in 2021 that completed his isolation from the people who were supposed to be his family. The fire, the father, and the confession. Billy Brown died on February 7, 2021, at 68 years old after suffering a seizure. Bear announced it on Instagram and described his father as their best friend and most definitely one of a kind. The grief from the show's audience was immediate and enormous. Matt reportedly reconciled with Billy before his death and made it home to say goodbye. But when season 13 aired its memorial episode titled One Last Dance, Da, Matt's scenes had been cut from the broadcast entirely. The family appeared on screen. He did not. No public explanation was ever offered for whose decision that was or why it happened the way it did. 2 months later, on April 11, 2021, Matt sat down alone outside at night and recorded a video that became one of the most discussed moments in the entire history of the show. Barely visible against the dark sky behind him, he said he knew he was not supposed to share other people's secrets, but that those secrets were destroying him. He said he was cold and had almost nothing to eat. And then, piece by piece, he began taking apart the myth his family had spent a decade building in front of millions of viewers. He said the show had misrepresented how the family actually lived. He alleged that producers had provided his parents with substances, and that this had contributed to the environment in which his own addiction developed. He alleged that his father had controlled all of the money the family earned from the show, and that he personally had been denied access to roughly $360,000 he said he found documented in paperwork his mother processed after Billy's death. He said that when he asked his mother for $100 for food, she said no. Bear responded quickly and without hesitation, calling the claims horrible lies told about a man who had passed just months earlier and saying Matt needed professional help. Discovery Channel never responded publicly. The specific allegations have never been independently verified and remain Matt's account alone. But look at what was actually happening in that video. Whatever the precise truth of every claim, you are watching a man who spent years carrying the weight of a manufactured story, sitting alone in the dark with barely any food, deciding he was finally done protecting it. That is not a performance. That is someone who has run out of reasons to pretend, and the response from most of his family was to pull back further rather than draw closer. The estrangement that the campfire confession completed did not begin in 2021. It had been building for nearly a decade, through a spiral that the cameras sometimes captured and mostly did not. The battle nobody could film. The first public sign of Matt's private war appeared before the show even aired. On August 30th, 2013, he borrowed a woman's car after drinking at a Juneau bar, hit a parked motorcycle in a parking lot, and drove away from the scene. When police caught up with him, his blood alcohol level was nearly twice Alaska's legal limit. In February of 2014, he was sentenced to 3 days in jail and 18 months of probation. Most of the show's audience never knew about it, but it was a warning that would eventually become impossible to ignore. By 2016, things had deteriorated badly enough that Matt entered inpatient treatment for 35 days. He spoke about it honestly in an interview with People magazine. He said he could see himself spiraling, that he had grown more withdrawn and slower, that the things which used to excite him no longer did. He traced the beginning of the drinking back to an extended period in Juneau, where he gradually started spending time with people who drank heavily. What started occasionally became more and more over time. When he came out of treatment, he sounded genuinely hopeful. He told the same publication that he had turned his weakness into a strength, and that not everyone makes it back from where he had been. He was glad to be one of the ones who did. That hope did not hold. By 2018, Matt had relapsed and entered the Betty Ford Center in California. Billy told reporters they would rather lose him from home for a little while than lose him forever. Nobody in that conversation knew how those words would sound 8 years later. After that second treatment stint, Matt never returned to the show. The family relocated to Washington State in 2018 without him. Around the same time, 2 women came forward with allegations that Matt had sexually assaulted them in separate incidents in California. The Los Angeles County District Attorney reviewed the matter and declined to prosecute due to insufficient evidence, and no charges were ever filed. But the combination of the relapse, the departure from the show, and the allegations meant that his relationship with most of his family had entered territory there was no obvious way back from. The addiction and the estrangement were the visible part of what was wrong with Matt Brown. But beneath both of them was something almost nobody who watched the show ever thought to question. Born into a performance. Matthew Jeremiah Brown was born on September 7, 1982, in Fort Worth, Texas. His father, Billy, relocated the family to a remote stretch of the Alaska Panhandle when Matt was still a toddler, settling in a place where the nearest town required a 20-minute boat ride to reach. Matt grew up without a school building, without neighborhood kids, and with almost no contact with the outside world. His parents homeschooled all 7 children, and the family called themselves a wolf pack, a unit that existed almost entirely on its own terms. When Alaskan Bush People premiered on May 6, 2014, Matt became the talkative eldest son, the survival expert, the warm and rough presence who carried the family's identity on his shoulders and made it look effortless. By 2015, the show was pulling nearly 5 million viewers, and Matt was a genuine reason for those numbers. Between filming sessions, they were staying at lodges rather than the remote homestead the show kept presenting as their permanent home. And a grand jury indictment in 2014 for falsifying permanent fund dividend applications confirmed what critics had been saying, that the family's born wild, never tamed identity was at minimum significantly constructed. Matt knew all of it firsthand. He performed the constructed version of himself for season after season anyway. And if you have ever had to perform a version of yourself that is not entirely honest, even for understandable reasons, you already understand the kind of weight that accumulates behind that performance over years and what it eventually costs the person doing it. The man who grew up performing a constructed version of himself for millions of strangers was the same man who ended up sleeping in a cemetery alone. And the distance between those two images is the full weight of this story. What the River Keeps. Matt Brown's story matters beyond the Brown family and beyond the Discovery Channel, and Bear's plea about comments in the hours after his brother's body was recovered is the reason why. He kept returning to the same point across every update he posted during those days. The people watching from the outside do not have the full picture. Matt's life was layered and painful in ways no headline could contain, and cruelty from strangers online is not a consequence-free act. The dozens of former reality television stars have passed away following reported personal struggles since the mid-2000s, with multiple separate tallies placing the figure at over 28 internationally. These shows extract drama from real human beings, build audiences around their vulnerabilities, and then release those people back into ordinary life with no support structure and a level of public scrutiny that follows them permanently. Matt had his addiction and his estrangement and his grief. But he was also carrying the specific and almost never discussed burden of being the only person in his family willing to say out loud that the story they had all been performing was never entirely real. The honesty that isolated him from his family and cost him his place on the show was the same honesty that made the people who genuinely followed him on YouTube feel like they actually knew him. He built a community out of his willingness to be truthful about his failures, and then watched portions of that same community use that vulnerability as a target. Bear made clear that Matt felt those comments in the last period of his life in a way that went very deep. His mother, Amy, was still recovering from COVID and pneumonia when her eldest son died. The family that millions of Americans watched build fires and catch fish together on their Friday nights is now sitting with a loss that no camera could ever properly frame. Matt Brown was 43 years old, the eldest of 7, and the only one who stood up and said the story his family sold to millions of viewers was never entirely real. He paid a price for that honesty that almost nobody watching from their couch would ever have stopped to calculate. The people who loved him, and the millions of strangers who watched him through a screen and told themselves they truly knew who he was, are only now beginning to sit with the possibility that they may never have fully known him at all. If this story hit you differently than you expected, drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is the kind of conversation that does not end when the video does.